Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Amanda Vinicky. Brandis Friedman is on assignment. On the show tonight, jury deliberations are officially underway in the trial of R. Kelly. A recap of powerful testimony and what the singer's sentence could look like if found guilty.
Beating cancer is something we can do together.
A White House initiative aims to cut cancer deaths in half. We talk about how that goal and how the patient experience can be improved.
What does it take to start a farm? A look at the challenges facing young farmers and what can be done to help.
We need to bring vaccines to where the community is at.
Initiative focuses on equitable rollout of the monkeypox vaccine.
NASA images a planet outside our solar system. Hear from a local astrophysicist who was part of the team.
There are more opportunities than just going and being a fry cook for McDonald's.
We introduce you to a program that's training the next generation to reach for the sky.
And Chicago's Dean of Rock and Roll Photographers talks about access, memorable photos, and his first book. But first, some of today's top stories. The stock market takes a tumble, having its worst day since June 2020. The Dow ended down more than 1,200 points. The S&P tumbled more than 4%, and the Nasdaq Composite fell more than 5%. The bad day on Wall Street raised fears the Federal Reserve will again raise interest rates to bring inflation under control. After 20 years serving in the City Council, Alderman Ariel Raboya says he will retire at the end of his term. He's the 13th alderperson not running for City Council next year. Raboya has been a staunch supporter of the Chicago Police Department and chairs the Immigrant and Refugee Rights Committee, though the committee has not met this year. At least 5 candidates have said they plan to run for the 30th ward seat next year. That includes Jessica Gutierrez, daughter of former Congressman Luis Gutierrez. Jessica narrowly lost to Raboya in 2019. A freight rail worker strike later this week could affect thousands of local commuters. Amtrak has already canceled some long-distance routes out of Chicago in preparation. Metra riders may also be impacted. Metra says it would have to suspend service on a number of lines if there is a strike, including the BNSF, Union Pacific Northwest, and Union Pacific West. Both Amtrak and Metra operate on many tracks that are owned and operated by freight railroads. According to the Association of American Railroads, a freight shutdown could cost the economy some $2 billion a day. Up next, jury deliberations begin in the trial of R. Kelly. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
After 2 days of closing arguments, jury deliberations are officially underway in the Chicago trial of R. Kelly. The 12-person jury will decide whether the R&B singer is guilty of child pornography, sexual abuse of minors, and obstruction of justice. WTTW News reporter Matt Masterson has been following this trial and joins us now with more. So, Matt, recap the last couple days of closing arguments for us.
So yesterday, prosecutors essentially said that once R. Kelly became a celebrity, he used his fame and influence to take advantage of and sexually assault multiple underage girls in the 90s and early 2000s. And his co-defendants helped cover him up. Their closing argument was that they proved the 13 charges that R. Kelly has been facing during this month-long trial. Today, his attorney, Kelly's attorney, Jennifer Bonjean, told jurors that the evidence presented at trial simply doesn't bear any of that out. She said much of the government's case relied on the testimony of people she called liars and extortionists who changed their stories repeatedly in different testimony over the years and simply can't be relied on to present an accurate portrayal of events over these many years.
We should know we're looking at some file footage of R. Kelly's Cook County trial from a few years ago. And Kelly, in this federal trial, he's not the only one on trial. Tell us about those co-defendants.
Right, he has 2 co-defendants, his former business manager, Daryl McDavid, and an ex-assistant named Milton June Brown. Prosecutors said these 2 men helped him for years to cover up this alleged abuse and work to pay people off and recover some of these illicit sex tapes that apparently showed Kelly with an underage girl, and that they did so because they knew it was in their best interest as his employees to remain financially stable, keep getting money from R. Kelly if they kept him out of jail. Attorneys for those two men, of course, denied this in their closing arguments and claimed that Milton Brown and Daryl McDavid never knew about any of these allegations, or at least that they were legitimate when they were working for Kelly to try to get some of these tapes back.
So looking back at this, Matt, tell us the most powerful testimony given on both sides over the last couple of weeks.
Certainly for the prosecutors, the most powerful testimony has come from 4 of these accusers who said that R. Kelly sexually assaulted them when they were minors. That includes Jane, Kelly's goddaughter, who testified under a pseudonym, that Kelly had sexually assaulted her hundreds of times when she was underage, and that she was indeed this 14-year-old who appeared in these illicit sex tapes that were at the center of this 2008 trial and at the current trial as well. As for the defense, the most crucial testimony had to have come from McDavid. He was the only one of the 3 defendants who actually testified. He told jurors that there was never some grand conspiracy among the men to cover up these tapes, and that no one in Kelly's universe really believed these allegations because there were other people out there who were legitimately trying to falsify sexual abuse claims against Kelly in the late 90s and early 2000s.
All right, well, if found guilty in this trial, what do we know about the potential prison sentence?
Well, he is facing 13 different charges, so there's a bit of a range of what he could face. A conviction for producing child pornography includes a mandatory minimum of at least 10 years. Sentences for receiving child pornography and conspiring to receive child pornography range from 5 to 20 years. The maximum sentence for enticement of a child is 10 years, and a conspiracy to obstruct justice is punishable by up to 5 years. But even regardless of whatever happens in this case, Kelly has already been sentenced to 30 years in prison following his conviction in a New York federal trial last year.
So already doing a lot of time, and this might add on top of that. All right, Matt Masterson, thank you very much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Matt's story and catch up on his coverage of the trial leading up to today by visiting our website. That's WTTW.com/news. President Joe Biden is reigniting an initiative that aims to cut cancer deaths in half in the next 25 years. Biden outlined the initiative called Cancer Moonshot in a speech yesterday, the same day as the 60th anniversary of President Kennedy's regular moonshot address.
Cancer does not discriminate red and blue. It doesn't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. Beating cancer is something we can do together.
And Biden outlined some of the progress and goals so far, which include investing in biotechnologies, facilitating the sharing of research data, and growing the U.S. biomanufacturing capacity. And joining us are Laura Jane Hyde, the CEO of Gildas Club Chicago, Dr. Alan Tan, Director of GU Medical Oncology at Rush University Medical Center, Dr. Samuel Volchenbaum, an Associate Professor of Pediatrics at UChicago Medicine, and Dr. Leonidas Platanias, Director of the Robert H. Lurie Comprehensive Cancer Center of Northwestern University. We appreciate all of you being here. Dr. Platanias, I'll start with you. We just mentioned Biden's goal of reducing cancer deaths in half over the next 25 years. How feasible is that in reality?
It is actually very feasible, and it should happen. It must happen. If you take a look on the trajectory of research developments in the cancer field over the last couple of 2 decades, it is very clear that we have now tools in our hands that allow rapid progress. So we have now developments in other fields that we take advantage in cancer research, like big data, bioinformatics, bioengineering, and we can have more impact with research. We need resources. If the resources are there, it's very doable.
Dr. Tan, it's not the first time that public policy has come together to focus on cancer. President Nixon announced a war on cancer 50 years ago. What do you see that is new and promising about this public policy initiative?
Right. So 50 years ago, in 1971, December 23rd, Nixon declared war on cancer. But we still are dealing with cancer as something that kills many patients. Although we're doing much better, more patients are living with cancer as a chronic condition now than a death sentence for all patients. But still, we need to do better. And I think we now have more tools. And 50 years later, we have gene technology, CAR T-cell therapy. We have gene editing and other immunotherapies that can help end cancer as we know it, as Joe Biden mentions.
And of course, we know there are hundreds of different types of cancers and as many types of treatments. Each cancer and each treatment seems to be kind of individualized. Laura Jane, your organization, Gildas Club, works on supporting patients that live with cancer. Part of what the president is talking about is also improving folks' lives that do live with cancer, perhaps making it a chronic disease. What does that look like? How do you improve the lives of those living with cancer?
Well, one tool that we use is called the Cancer Experience Registry, and that is administered both locally, and then the aggregate data is gathered by our Cancer Support Community Headquarters organization. And it really looks at the broad impact of cancer on both the patients and caregivers, helps us look at different aspects that play into the impact of the disease, including the emotional, physical, practical, and financial impact. And that helps us deliver programs that are best designed to meet the patient's needs. So the same innovation is happening on the psychosocial side of things.
And Dr. Volchenbaum, you work specifically in pediatrics with childhood cancers. Is it true that most childhood cancer is related to genetic factors over lifestyle factors? And how challenging then does it make it to improve detection and screening for children?
Yeah, with kids, it's it's all about genomic drivers, and it's not things that we usually can screen for, and it's not things that we can usually prevent. The name of the game with pediatric cancer, the reason we've made so many improvements is our ability to collect and share data. And that's what's really exciting about this initiative, is it really puts a lot of funding behind the concepts of collecting better data and sharing it and allowing researchers to have much better access to high quality research data so that we can make better discoveries.
And Dr. Volchenbaum, I know at the University of Chicago there has been a lot of progress in some of the data you've collected. Could you just kind of expound on that for us?
Yeah, at U Chicago, we have the Genomic Data Commons, which is an NCI initiative, part of the original Moonshot initiative in 2016, which has the world's largest collection of genomic data on patients with cancer. It's part of the NCI's Cancer Research Data Commons ecosystem. And then my group runs the Pediatric Cancer Data Commons, which is now the largest collection of pediatric cancer research data available to researchers. And again, we've only been able to do this because the community has now risen up and decided that it's important to combine and share data so that we can actually make new discoveries.
That's interesting, because that was one of the top initiatives in President Biden's plan that he talked about. Dr. Platanius, have there been significant barriers to different institutions sharing their cancer data with each other?
No, not really. I think there is a clear directive from the National Cancer Institute that all the comprehensive cancer centers that are supported by the National Cancer Institute share their data, and researchers do that now. We all realize that when you share data, when you share information, things move faster. So I don't think that's a barrier at this time anymore.
At this time, so improving, as you mentioned. Dr. Tan, I'm sorry, go ahead, yes, go ahead.
No, I was going to say improving significantly.
Improving significantly. Okay, important point. So, Dr. Tan, the president's also mentioning screening, more screening for things like colorectal or breast cancer, noting that during COVID, maybe thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people might have missed screening. Is screening a huge part of reducing cancer, or are there other parts that are perhaps more important?
Right, yeah, I think we definitely need to screen cancers, maybe even earlier too. I think there's initiatives to do cell-free DNA blood tests that can detect cancer at a more molecular level. It's still in its infancy, but it's looking promising, and we need more volunteers to participate, healthy volunteers to compare with sick volunteers. And eventually, I think we're going to have a database where we can screen people with blood tests even at a much earlier age. Nowadays we're seeing patients that are coming in their 30s, even 20s. Last week I saw a bladder cancer patient. It was 27-year-olds, which is not unheard of these days.
And so that seems to be exciting developments then. But Dr. Tan, I mean, are there downsides to screening too soon or to screening too often, especially things like colorectal cancer? Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, the downside of over screening is you get some false positives. You end up doing too many procedures, and that is a burden to the healthcare system as well. We probably want to screen patients that are at highest risk. Maybe they have a strong family history or history of polyps, those kind of things. But many times we'll often see sporadic cancers in patients with no history, no family history, and they come in with young age of cancer. So I think there's other things that we don't understand. Maybe something that has to do with the environment or the gut microbiome. And so there's more research going into that as well.
Still so many things we don't understand about the causes of so many cancers. Laura Jane, another one of the goals here is more equitable treatment of cancer, noting that the data does show that communities of color do tend to experience higher death rates from cancer. So what does more equitable treatment look like?
We have to address why that distrust in the system still exists, right? And we saw that in COVID. I think focusing on reducing the social determinants of health that directly impact both quality of care and access to care is really important. And that's a key part of the enhancing oncology model that's going to be unveiled later this year. So there's a lot of opportunity, and we just have to keep our eye on the ball and recognize that if we're not treating everyone, it won't be equitable.
Dr. Volchenbaum, how does understanding pediatric cancer help with understanding cancer in general and reducing deaths in general?
Yeah, I mean, pediatric cancer has been a paradigm for how to do distributed clinical trials. Most pediatric cancer patients are treated on clinical trials that are run across the country, across North America. And I think that's a model for how we should be treating all types of cancer. It helps us learn from every patient, and what we learn allows us to learn more about the biology and allows us to extrapolate that to other types of cancers. I want to make the other comment that pediatric cancer is one of the greatest success stories because a lot more patients survive now than die, but we still have a long way to go, and we have to take care of our survivors, and we have to address the cancers that are still killing a lot of kids. So it's a long way to go, but I think this initiative that the president announced is extremely important in pushing us in that direction.
Dr. Platanius, are there any treatments with respect to specific cancers that are coming online now? Any research coming online you're particularly excited about that could particularly have an impact?
Yeah, I'm very excited, and the whole field is excited about what is happening with the immune system, with immunotherapy. The immune system is very powerful and has the ability to eliminate cancers, but we don't know exactly how to activate it and how to drive it specifically to cancers. And the last few years, there have been some dramatic developments that change the dynamics of how to deal with some very fatal cancers. For instance, we get very important responses right now with immunotherapy in lung cancer, with things that we could not do anything before. So I'm very optimistic that things will happen there, but we need more research. We need more dollars for research. That will be key. And when I say research, I mean starting from basic science research in the labs all the way to the clinical trials.
All right, a lot to be excited about here and a lot of work and study left to go. And our thanks to Laura Jane Hyde, Dr. Alan Tan, Dr. Samuel Volchenbaum, and Dr. Leonidas Platanius for this very important discussion. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And now to Amanda for a look at efforts to get younger people to farm. Amanda.
Paris, farming is big business in Illinois, contributing billions to the state's economy. And for many, the pandemic raised awareness of the need for a local and regional food supply chain. But the number of farmers in Illinois is declining, and the most recent census data shows us the average age of a farmer is nearly 60. It's a national issue, according to a recent survey by the National Young Farmers Coalition. The lack of young farmers is concerning to the agricultural industry as well as to lawmakers. Here to talk about those challenges are Evan Holteen, president of the Bureau County Farm Bureau, and David Toledo, farmer and owner of Contemporary Farmer Incorporated. Thanks to each of you for joining us this evening. Now, Evan, let's start with you. Why is it important to have young farmers? And by the way, well, I personally like to think that age is just a number. In this case, young is actually defined by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and that's those who are 35 and younger.
Yeah, I think, when we look at the ag sector and farming specifically, it's just you need people to carry on the torch from the previous generations. And when there's fewer and fewer of us to do that, it relies more of a workload on, many less farmers than we've had in the past.
So fewer farmers, and I imagine this is also physically grueling work, and the older you get up in age, I'll speak for myself here, harder to do things sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just besides the physical strength, to needed to be farming, there's a lot of other stressors, emotional, financial. So it's, the more farmers we could have, the better off we'd be.
So to that end, David, let's go to you. And I'm not going to ask you to share your age here on TV, but you are young. What challenges did you face as you got into farming and food production?
I am a good 30 years old, and some of my biggest challenges is kind of just starting up and establishing this business. I have this mission and I have this idea of what the future of agriculture can look like. And as a first-time business owner and grower here in the U.S., it's been difficult for me to kind of just figure out, how to do it. I know how to work the land. I know what I believe the best practices are. But it's a lot of work. It's a lot of mental work. It's a lot of logistics. You have to strategically plan when to seed so you can plan for your harvest, take your soil analysis so you can get the nutritional value that we want from local crops.
So get the crops to actually produce when you need it to. There's financial aspects, I'm sure, perhaps applying for grants. Now, Evan, according to that National Young Farmer Survey, a major barrier to entry is access to land. Is it at the point where it's so expensive that you basically need to inherit a farm if you want to, grow commodities or raise livestock for a living?
Oh, I don't know that I'd go that far, but especially the last couple of years, land costs have just really gone outrageously higher. Access to capital for any aspect of farming is tough for a young farmer, but when you put in the 20-25% or more increase in land costs that we've seen the last couple of years, it's a major barrier to getting someone started and establishing your own ground.
So, David, is that something that you experienced? And by the way, as an LGBTQ Latinx individual, was that a particular challenge? That's something that the survey showed as well, that the challenge is greater for people of color.
Definitely. I mean, I started my business with absolutely no equity. I knew what I wanted to do, and I still want to fulfill all of these agricultural ideas and visions of how this local food system can look like. I started my business with $3,000 from my savings and $1,000 from my parents. And then from that, I was able to get revenue and continue to manage and grow operations, which has been incredible to see that growth, but it's incredibly challenging to get more resources, to go and get answers, and to continue to establish these roots on this local Chicago food system.
And David, what exactly are you growing? Microgreens can be purchased, I believe, from the back of the yards. They're grown there. What are you growing?
Absolutely. As fall is approaching, we are ramping up our microgreens and our educational programs about microgreens. And we manage and maintain people's home gardens and bring regenerative agriculture education to classrooms. So we have this beautiful, intricate food system, and Contemporary Farmer Inc. wants to be able to bring local food and agricultural lessons into the classroom and teaching people that they can grow food year round, because we can do it and it's not difficult, but we're going to need a lot more farmers. So let's work together and growing together. So yeah.
And now, Evan, circumstances might be different, I would imagine, of course, for residents and farmers in rural areas than they are for those in Chicago. You're in Bureau County. That's about 2.5 hours southwest, just past LaSalle in Peru. What can you share about the differences there and the importances of regional farms, especially for urban dwellers who might not be accustomed to that sort of lifestyle?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think despite, whatever differences we may have between the rural and urban areas, I think you can make a lot of similarities in the challenges we're facing just looking at any small business, right? Access to capital, healthcare costs, just basic standard of living costs right now with inflation, input prices. I'm sure David's seeing the same seeing the same issues that we're seeing. Just these costs have just run away, and it's getting harder and harder to farm and be profitable. But as we saw in the pandemic, having local and regional access to food is such an important part for all people in all areas.
David, do you want to add anything there? Just briefly, you said we're going to need more farmers. Why?
Local food. We saw our distribution of food, our system of distribution get disrupted during the pandemic, and putting knowledge and the skill of growing food back to the people is going to help local farmers and local individuals take charge of their food, getting more environmentally conscious and getting back to nature so we can connect as people, as society and nature, and really help our local food system grow and thrive. We're going to need farmers, we're going to need home growers, we're going to need grocery stores and organizations helping in every single way to bring good local food to our residents everywhere.
And Evan, I want to land with you. We've got only a just really brief bit of time, but I know that the Farm Bureau does work to support farmers in these endeavors. Anything that legislators can do?
I think just being cognizant, aware of the issues that we face, and then, as David pointed out, I think putting a bigger and larger importance on vocational ag education in all levels of our schooling is something that's going to help promote more farmers, young farmers, as we move forward.
Well, thank you so much for that, Evan Haltine and David Toledo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, Chicago's Dean of Rock and Roll Photographers talks about access, memorable photos, and his first book. So stay with us.
Much of the story of Latinos in America is that of entrepreneurship. About 5 million Latino-owned businesses currently exist in the U.S.
Predominantly Latino communities often bear the environmental burden of heavy industry. Residents of those communities say they have a hard time making their concerns heard.
A Chicago-based photographer has a personal understanding of immigration, and he has spent years documenting small businesses.
The forces of gentrification can make people being priced out of their neighborhoods feel powerless. But the founders of Lolita's Bodega say residents have more power than they think.
There's much more ahead on the program, including a look at a planet outside our solar system. But first, whether touring with the Rolling Stones or taking photos of Ella Fitzgerald here at WTTW, photographer Paul Natkin has snapped memorable images of music giants. Rock, reggae, jazz, folk, R&B, he's captured it all. Producer Mark Vitale caught up with him, and he shared pictures worth many thousands of words.
When I was starting out, I made this conscious decision from the beginning that I wasn't just going to go and shoot the bands that I liked. If I did that, I'd be shooting pictures of John Prine and Steve Goodman all day long. But I figured I got to be well-rounded, and I've got to shoot everything. So I made friends with the promoters, and I would go to a concert every night. I would go to a thrash metal concert one night, and the next night I'd go and shoot Rodney Dangerfield. These are all my covers.
We met Paul Natkin in his home studio and combed through nearly 50 years of archives. Some work ended up on magazine covers. Other pictures fill the first book dedicated to his photography.
I like to shoot anybody that puts on a show. Anybody that jumps around, even if I don't like them as people, which I do like most of the people that I photograph, but I shoot the Rolling Stones anytime they're in town. Buddy Guy, I've worked for over 40 years. I took a picture of Ozzy Osbourne and Randy Rhoads back in 1983. People tell me it's the most famous heavy metal picture ever taken.
That image even ended up on a limited edition snowboard. At WTTW, he worked on the set of Soundstage, where he shot Count Basie and Ella Fitzgerald in 1979. His big break came in 1984 when he photographed Prince, Bruce Springsteen, and the Jacksons' Victory Tour in just 1 month. He had incredible access to legendary entertainers.
These guys are not like aliens. They're just normal human beings that just happen to have some kind of talent that propels them to a stage. And they like to have fun too.
And how many people do you know who can say this?
And I found myself playing pool with Keith Richards against Eric Clapton and David Bowie.
That story's on our website, where Natkin also tells the tale of photographing Prince's birthday party. Even with exceptional access, some pictures are tough to get, including this photo of Miles Davis.
He played the whole show with his back to the audience, and I kneeled on the floor. It was a hardwood floor at Park West. I stayed there for 2.5 hours until he turned around to leave, and he waved, and I took one picture.
The music industry has drastically changed in the nearly 50 years he's been on the job.
I don't shoot much anymore. Back 10 years ago, I shot 200 bands in a year. And the year before the pandemic, I shot 8. And it's because bands and managers and publicists don't want to be photographed anymore. They want their friends to take pictures with their iPhones. And they all have the same answer when I ask them why, and they say, because you guys make too much money off of us. And if they ever looked at my sales report from the agency that represent me, they would just start laughing. Because more than half the pictures that they license of mine, my share of the sale is under $2.
And while Natkin celebrates his book release, he's not sure where his archive of music history will end up.
I haven't quite figured that out yet. They'll probably go to a museum or a college. You know, who knows?
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
What a career. The book is called Natkin, The Moment of Truth. There are more photographs and stories from Paul Natkin on our website, including the time he was shooting pool with the Rolling Stones and photographing Prince on his 26th birthday. Now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
We all have stories like that, right, Amanda?
Totally.
Wow, iconic images. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, the James Webb Space Telescope is used to image a planet outside of our solar system for the first time. Monkeypox vaccines are set to go to communities that are most at risk under a plan from the White House. What an equitable vaccine rollout looks like.
There are more opportunities than just going and being a fry cook for McDonald's.
And the sky is the limit for participants in a program that is training the next generation on how to fly. But first, some more of today's top stories. Ken Starr, the former Solicitor General who investigated President Bill Clinton, has died. Starr grew worldwide fame for his probe into the Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky scandal in the 1990s, which led to President Clinton's impeachment. In 2020, Starr was part of former President Donald Trump's legal team during his impeachment trial. In a memorable statement to Congress, Starr said, "We are living in, quote, the age of impeachment." Starr was 76 years old. Republican candidate for governor Darren Bailey has referred to Chicago as a hellhole many times and co-sponsored a resolution to remove the city from the rest of the state. Now he is one of the city's newest residents.
As I've said from day one, I want to immerse myself in the culture.
Bailey says he is renting an apartment in the building formerly known as the John Hancock Center as he campaigns, and that is, of course, one of Chicago's most iconic and expensive residential buildings. Chief Judge of Cook County, Timothy Evans, is elected to serve an 8th term by a majority of the county's circuit judges that he presides over. Evans ran unopposed. The Circuit Court of Cook County is the largest of the 24 judicial circuits in Illinois, with more than 1 million cases filed annually. Chief Judge Evans oversees 400 judges across 6 geographic districts. The city announces that all of the applicants have been chosen for its $31 million Universal Basic Income Pilot Program. It's dubbed the Chicago Resilient Communities Pilot and will provide $500 direct cash payments to households with incomes at or below 250% of the federal poverty line and who have experienced economic hardship due to COVID. The pilot received more than 176,000 applicants in all. Of the chosen participants, the city says the median household income is $14,000 a year. The program is one initiative from the mayor's $1.2 billion recovery plan funded by federal COVID stimulus money that the city received. A freight rail worker strike later this week could affect thousands of local commuters. Amtrak has already canceled some long-distance routes out of Chicago in preparation. Metro riders may also be impacted as well. Metro says it would have to suspend service on a number of lines if there is a strike, including the BNSF, Union Pacific Northwest, and Union Pacific West. Both Amtrak and Metra operate on many tracks that are owned and operated by freight railroads. According to the Association of American Railroads, a freight shutdown could cost the economy $2 billion a day. For the first time, the James Webb Space Telescope has been used to directly image an exoplanet. That's a planet outside of our solar system. It's not the first time we've seen pictures of exoplanets, but it is the first time that the Webb Telescope's powerful gaze has been turned to the task. And these, along with future observations, could tell us more about alien worlds beyond our solar system than ever before, and just maybe even detect life. And joining us now to talk about these new images is Professor Jason Wong with the Department of Physics and Astronomy at Northwestern University. Professor Wong was part of the NASA team that helped create these images. Professor Wong, welcome to Chicago tonight. Before we get to your role in this, first of all, what is this planet that we've got images of now, and where is it?
So this planet is a super Jupiter. It's a planet that's several times the mass of our own Jupiter. It is a very young planet. It is only tens of millions of years old. It's actually younger than the dinosaurs. But this is the type of planet that we can actually take images of directly with the James Webb Space Telescope. This planet is only a few hundred light years away, so it's close by in astronomical scales, but quite far in any sorts of real life.
And it's young and it's massive, so it's several times bigger than Jupiter. Do we know what kind of atmosphere it has, what it's made of?
We have a somewhat of an idea. We think it's somewhat similar to Jupiter, but one of the main goals of taking these images Webb is really trying to understand what this atmosphere is made out of and exactly what these planets outside of our solar system are made out of.
And as I understand, it's pretty far away from its own star. It takes something like 630 years to make a full orbit around its star. So tell us about your role, how you came to get involved here.
Yeah, so I'm part of an international team that's basically our goal is to test out all the various exoplanet imaging capabilities of the James Webb Space Telescope. So we picked this target as kind of our benchmark target to test out all of these modes. And my expertise is really in trying to do the image processing to see these planets. So what I've been involved with is removing the glare of the bright host star that this planet orbits around. So even though it orbits, many tens of astronomical units away from its star, the glare of the star is so bright that it's really hard to see this faint planet. So my work is trying to remove this glare of the star using techniques adapted to the James Webb Space Telescope in order for us to make these images.
Right, that's the key here, because we're many light years away and we can really only see these stars, and you have to be able to see the planet. Explain just how difficult it is to develop the technology to be able to see a planet in the glare of another star.
Yeah, so this requires two things. One is specialized optics that have been installed on the James Webb Space Telescope to kind of suppress the glare of the star. But oftentimes these optics alone aren't enough. There's still residual diffracted light. And what I do is use image processing to basically subtract out the remainder of the light. And to give you a sense for how hard this is, we're talking about looking for a planet that's tens of thousands to million times fainter than its host star. It's kind of akin to if you're trying to watch a firefly trying to orbit fly around a streetlight, but you're standing about a few miles away, to give you a sense for basically the distances involved and just the brightness ratios involved in seeing this.
So clearly the Webb telescope, a very powerful telescope, and a very tough job it has to do. So this exoplanet that you found in a star system a few million light years away, does it teach us anything about our own solar system?
Yeah, so this, like we were mentioning, this planet is many times the mass of Jupiter. It's orbiting much further away than any of these solar system and any of the planets in our own solar system. So it's quite different from the planets in our own solar system, and it kind of teaches us about the diversity of planetary systems out there, and gives us one of these data points for how exoplanetary systems are quite different from our own.
And so given that, and given the billions of stars and the billions of potential exoplanets that orbit around those stars, is there any way that the Webb telescope could one day detect a so-called Goldilocks planet, a planet that orbits a lot closer but that can be habitable for some form of carbon-based life?
Yeah, so that's obviously a very exciting question. So there are some hopes that with Webb using its spectroscopic capabilities that there might be a chance to study the atmospheres and possibly to detect some signatures that could be indicative of life around a small subset of stars. But it's not. It would really depend on whether the universe wants to help us or wants to hide some of these Goldilocks planets from us. So there's only
explain what you mean by that. If the universe wants to help us,
in that if we get lucky and that there just happens to be the right planet orbiting around the right star that just happens to be close enough to us and is at the right temperature that we can actually see these see a Goldilocks planet's atmosphere, then there's only a few of these known systems. There's only a few of these systems that we actually know of. So it's really there's really only a few. It really depends on whether we get lucky or not with where we are in this in our galaxy in terms of finding a nearby system that has the right characteristics that Webb would be able to look for biosignatures.
We'll wait and see if the universe gives us that good fortune, although we could say we kind of got pretty lucky with Earth here, so maybe lightning strikes twice or more. All right, a very exciting research, and our thanks to Professor Jason Wong.
Thank you.
And up next, a push for an equitable distribution of the monkeypox vaccine. That's in a conversation that first aired on Chicago Tonight Black Voices with Brandis Friedman, so please stay with us.
Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
The White House is announcing a program to distribute more monkeypox vaccines. The goal is to reach Black and Latino LGBTQ+ communities who are most at risk. According to CDC data from this month, Black people account for nearly 40% of monkeypox cases in the U.S., but received only about 10% of monkeypox vaccine doses. Latinos make up nearly 30% of cases while receiving about 20% of monkeypox vaccine doses nationwide. Joining us now with more are Dr. Anu Hazra, assistant professor of medicine at UChicago Medicine and a physician at Howard Brown Health, and Jagadisha Deveshri Dakas, research assistant professor and associate director for the Institute for Sexual and Gender Minority Health and Wellbeing at Northwestern University. Thanks to you both for joining us. Professor Dakas, let's start with you, please. Now, we just spoke about the national data. Where do you think Chicago stands in the vaccine rollout for monkeypox?
Oh, thank you for having me. In terms of the vaccine rollout here in Chicago, I mean, it really parallels what has been happening nationally, where we have not seen what we characterize as an equitable distribution of the vaccine to the communities and populations that most need. And really what it represents is the ongoing challenges that we have in public health around making sure that the most marginalized and impacted receive, first and foremost, the benefits from these types of programs that are interventions.
Dr. Hazra, monkeypox disproportionately impacts men who have sex with men, and especially Black and Latino folks. But of course, we know this is not a gay disease necessarily. How does intersectionality, though, play into the role in addressing vaccine disparities?
I mean, it's the entire game here. I think the issue here is actually understanding the communities that are impacted the most. So thinking about Black and brown queer communities that are doubly marginalized in American society, and oftentimes even harder to reach with any biomedical interventions, including vaccinations. And so I think, the Biden administration and the CDC are really talking about putting investiture into community stakeholders, into trusted community members that are able to relay this type of message in the right way.
Professor Dakas, what do you think are some of the barriers that get in the way of a more equitable vaccine rollout?
Well, I mean, I think one of the first things that comes to mind is when we talk about stigma, especially intersectional stigma that members of the populations that are most at risk experience, based on racial identity, sexual orientation, and gender identities. And then there's also, as Dr. Hazard related to, is sort of access and the barriers to access too. I think that's why when we saw the initial rollouts nationally, and I think about the images that came out of New York City, where it was mostly white sexual minority men who were in line to receive the vaccines, and you saw very few BIPOC or people of color individuals there. an understanding that white folks by and large in our country have more access to healthcare and experience fewer barriers in accessing healthcare based on, thinking about people of color and their experiences with perceived, anticipated, and actual forms of discrimination and bias when they go and engage healthcare systems.
Dr. Hazra, how do we overcome some of those barriers to reach the marginalized communities, especially in Chicago?
I think there has to be targeted messaging that is really directed for the community and by the community. I think we need to bring vaccines to where the community is at. We can't expect folks to come all the way to, vaccine events in Boys Town or in East Lakeview when we're not able to actually provide vaccinations in the communities that we serve. I think, the blueprint has already been planned out with COVID vaccinations where we had, Protect Chicago Plus, which is really focusing on high vulnerability index zip codes and making sure that we had not only vaccination events, but also information events. It's one thing to have biomedical interventions, but if you don't have people who have trust in that, then you can have the best intervention in the world, but it's not going to get to the populations that need it. So having town halls, again, with community stakeholders that are able to really explain what's going on in the community, recognize who's at risk, and making sure those folks who are at risk feel empowered and taking care of their own health.
Professor Dacus, same question to you. What is the best way to reach marginalized communities?
Well, I just will really echo what Dr. Hazra said. I mean, it's really about engaging community partners and thinking about having community members, and especially those who have had positive experiences, be ambassadors and really, positively promote, the benefits of receiving these services. And it makes me think about, those individuals who want to receive vaccines and voluntarily go, and, having challenges around providing access. Those who have positive experiences really are the promoters who have said to their, who have spread the messages amongst their networks that, no, this is something that we can do to really, protect ourselves as individuals, but also to positively protect our communities.
Dr. Hazra, does vaccine hesitancy exist for the monkeypox vaccine the same way we saw it exist to some degree with the COVID-19 vaccine?
I think it definitely plays a role here. I think there's some key differences between the monkeypox vaccine and the COVID-19 vaccine, particularly around how long the vaccines has been around, which also plays into, the impact or the degree of hesitancy there is. I think, for the most part, we know in general in this country, queer people have had higher rates of vaccine uptake in the COVID vaccine than their non-queer counterparts. But when you actually separated that by race and ethnicity, we still saw the same types of divides we saw in the general population, particularly among Black and Brown queer Americans, still having ongoing needs for more education and more trust in these vaccines before they would uptake it. And I think the same story is occurring here. The messaging that we're giving, at least at Howard Brown at the University of Chicago, is really thinking about these are not new vaccines. These have been approved for several years now, well studied with plenty of safety data. So this is not something that's been just developed in the setting of this outbreak, like sort of what happened with the COVID vaccine. So overcoming that type of vaccine hesitancy, or the reason for that vaccine hesitancy, has been somewhat easier than with the COVID-19 vaccines.
Dr. Hazra, is there a danger in sort of trying to get the vaccine to the community that needs it most, but could that sort of make other communities think, oh, well, this isn't really my problem. I don't have to go get that vaccine?
Yeah, I think that's a really tough needle that a lot of us in public health and in medicine have been trying to thread. I think recognizing community at risk and recognizing that and stating that that's not stigmatizing itself, that's factual. But it's when we sort of impart a moral framework on that fact is what starts to perpetuate stigma. And so recognizing who is at risk is important, because if we can recognize who is at risk, we can create targeted interventions and targeted messaging to make sure that, if you are a Black and Brown, man associated men or bisexual male, it's important for you to recognize your risk of monkeypox and how to protect yourself. At the same time, it's other folks or other institutions that place some sort of morality onto that fact, and then that's what ends up perpetuating stigma, which is wholly counterproductive into everything that we're trying to do. I think, in general, we recognize that monkeypox has been around for over half a century, and we know it can impact any community, any population, anywhere. This current outbreak is just concentrated in this specific population, but that does not mean that's, the hallmark of this infection. It's just what's going on with this current outbreak.
Professor Dacus, what are the lessons that we should have learned from COVID-19 in addressing case and vaccine disparities that we could also apply to the monkeypox vaccine?
Oh, very simply, I think about, the same populations that are most affected by COVID are the same populations that we're seeing most affected by monkeypox and have been most affected and impacted by other public health crises, HIV, we think about like health disparities. So it's really about elevating, and prioritizing those communities and populations most at risk when it comes to these public health crises. Particularly when we talk about like Black and brown sexual minority men who, already face a myriad of other, psychological health related and mental emotional challenges around their identities, intersectional identities. And so I think we've as Dr. Hager said, we've got a blueprint. We know what to do. It's a matter of it's really enacting and really prioritizing this population and saying, hey, we've got the data. This makes sense. And we understand how these diseases and infections really impact our larger populations and where they show up the most frequently. And so, really making that the priority, especially when it comes to, prioritizing the implementation of interventions and thinking about policy that really supports that and provides resources to do this and to really support our community partners that have stepped up to, make a difference and an impact.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to you both for joining us, Dr. Anu Hazra and Professor Jagadish Devashri-Dekas. Thanks for joining us. Back with more Chicago Tonight right after this.
The future of flight. That's how a Chicagoland nonprofit describes its program and passion for aviation. Arts correspondent Angel Ito jets over to West Chicago for flight lessons with Tuskegee Next and shares how they're helping Black and brown students soar.
Tuskegee Next was born out of a passion for aviation.
Since 2015, Tuskegee Next has worked with students ages 18 through 20 to help them explore career paths within aviation. The program was also born out of a need. There's a mandatory retirement for pilots at age 65, in addition to there being such a high cost to even obtain a license.
When we began our program, we were blessed by the presence of 6 original Tuskegee Airmen who helped us dub this organization as the next generation of Tuskegee Airmen. That's how we got our name.
The Tuskegee Airmen were the first Black aviators in the U.S. Armed Forces. Founded in 1941, the squadron faced racism and segregation, limiting their opportunities for advancement.
We asked them questions about how we should operate as an organization in order to honor their legacy.
And while it takes the average person interested in aviation 9 to 12 months to earn their pilot license, Tuskegee Next ensures their cadets get it done in 8 weeks with a $30,000 investment in each student. It also covers housing, food, and other educational components during their on-campus stay.
Training Monday through Friday for at least 8 hours. After the training, they have 1 to 2 hours of study hall, depending on the day. They have resume writing workshops, corporate visits throughout the summer, community events that they give back to, like our aviation days, where they actually run STEM-oriented stations to teach younger students about aviation and aerospace. To see them gain confidence in themselves, gain confidence as pilots, to grow, it's exciting for me. And Marcellus is a great example of that. His story is full circle since he was one of our cadets from our very first class.
I witnessed some of those hours Marcellus Freeman put in firsthand, 3,000 feet in the air. With a father in aviation, it's a dream Freeman's had since he was 6. Now at 25, he's already flying corporate jets.
Tuskegee's work is so important because it provides access to people who otherwise wouldn't even know this is a possibility. They realize there are more opportunities than just going and being a fry cook for McDonald's or going off and maybe being a chef. Sure, that's a great job, maybe being a chef for a 5-star restaurant, but how would you like to get paid to go fly? When I fly for a living, I've only met 3 or 4 Black pilots. I can count on probably both hands the amount of Black pilots I've met that are in my position I am now. The ones that are my age, probably even fewer.
When he isn't serving as second in command in the air, Freeman is mentoring cadets with Tuskegee Next, a position he doesn't take for granted.
Being able to relate to those cadets and go, hey, I've been through what you've been through, but to provide them with an image of where they can be. So now you're a cadet. In the next 5 years, you can be teaching the next class like I'm teaching you. That's my goal.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
Tuskegee Next is currently accepting applications for their next round of cadets. That application closes December 31st. Back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7.
But first, at 9 o'clock tonight on WTTW, a look at those impacted by one of America's most urgent health crises, suicide. That's in the new feature, Facing Suicide, premiering here on WTTW at 9 o'clock tonight. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and good night.